Hey everyone, I'm Jad Daly, President and CEO of American Forests, and I'm excited to have the opportunity to speak to you today about reforestation as a climate action opportunity. So I wanted to share a few slides with you that will help put this opportunity into perspective. The first thing is just to recognize that our forests are already delivering for climate change. I think this is really important because whether you're talking about reforestation or any other way of using forests as a climate change solution, there's this inherent skepticism about whether it can work. And the reality is we have very clear data from the US EPA greenhouse gas inventory that our forests are already providing a net sink of almost 753 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent on an annual basis, which is almost 15% of our carbon dioxide emissions from fossil fuels. And so it's just really important to recognize everything we're doing here is trying to build on an already proven and winning strategy for climate change. But look, the science is equally clear that we can't just simply count on what we've already got and build from there. We actually have to play defense and offense at the same time. And a couple of reasons in particular for that. One is that development is expected to expand substantially and start eating away at our forest cover. We've generally been expanding in forests over many decades, but we're now kind of reaching a point of stasis and starting to decline. And it's expected that that decline in the overall amount of forest cover from development is going to continue. And so we need to offset that by creating more forests elsewhere and by slowing conversion. And furthermore, climate change is harming our forests in ways that we've never imagined possible in the past. Greater mortality from all sorts of threats and stressors, such as drought, pests, and wildfire. And so we have to overcome that as well. And again, reforestation has a role there too. And so as we've mapped out, what are all the actions that we need to take in our forests to play a good offense and defense? It's very clear that reforestation is the single biggest pathway for carbon gains in our forests. And this comes from research such as the Obama administration's mid-century strategy for deep decarbonization, as well as, for example, more recent research from the Nature Conservancy that our organization was proud to co-publish together through a new reforestation hub that you can visit on the internet, which maps reforestation opportunity across the United States, shows 133 million acres of reforestation opportunity in the United States, and the potential, if we were to use all of those acres, planting more than 60 billion trees, to increase annual carbon capture in our forests by 333 million tons of CO2 per year. That's a more than 40% boost to our carbon sink by adding more trees to the landscape. And so this is the stop one on the highway to delivering forests for climate. So I want to get into a little bit what the different kind of flavors and strategic considerations that we need to have in mind to get that right. And the first is, you might have seen this, again, great research from our friends at the Nature Conservancy, looking at the role of natural regeneration. Forests that, if we just take the right steps to basically get out of their way, will come back on their own. And a couple things to say about that. First of all, everyone in the reforestation field wants to use natural regeneration when we can. We're all looking to conserve resources and plant trees only where we really need to do so. And I'll get into some situations where we really need to plant trees to get the results that we're looking for. But natural regeneration is absolutely one of the critical tools in the reforestation toolbox. And I just want to put on the special condition that in many cases now, we need to think about assisted natural regeneration. Places where natural regeneration is going to occur, but it's not going to occur with the vigor that we need. Situations where what's going to come back through natural regeneration is not going to be climate resilient. It's not going to be the right mix of tree species and genetics into the future. And so where we may need to do some management in order to really facilitate the right kind of natural regeneration, repairing soils, other sorts of things that we can do just to give nature a little helping hand. I also want to talk about the distinction between afforestation and reforestation, and this causes some concern and confusion in the field. Afforestation is bringing forest cover back to places where forests have been totally cleared and converted for other uses. For example, cleared for agriculture. But importantly, afforestation is bringing trees back and forests back to those places where they naturally have existed in the past. Afforestation is not about reforesting, for example, native grasslands where trees haven't existed before and aren't ecologically appropriate. It's about bringing forest cover back where it once existed and was cleared for human uses. And so there's some great examples I'll share with you of what that opportunity is about. Reforestation in this context, I know reforestation sometimes uses a blanket for all these activities, but I want to focus in here on a particular aspect of reforestation, that is replanting and regenerating trees within existing forests. So for example, reforesting burn scars after especially intense fires. And so there are all sorts of ways in which we're losing more and more of our existing forests. We need to go back into damaged areas and repair them with tree planting or that natural regeneration that I was just describing. But those are within existing forest areas. And so that's really the key distinction between afforestation and reforestation. So in terms of afforestation, we've got some regions like the lower Rio Grande Valley of South Texas, like the lower Mississippi alluvial valley through states such as Arkansas and Mississippi and Louisiana, where we once had these incredibly ecologically rich, lush forests along river bottoms that were predominantly cleared for agriculture. And in many cases where agriculture is no longer a viable use due to, in some cases, not enough water, in some cases too much water, in such as chronic flooding. And so those happen to be some of the most exciting places to advance reforestation because they're carbon-rich forest types and soils. They're places that have incredibly high, off-the-charts biodiversity, so bringing those forests back helps us address biodiversity desires and concerns. And also they're places that have impacts on water quality, not just locally, but in terms of larger river systems and even places like the Gulf of Mexico. So our organization has been very proud for a few decades now to work with the Fish and Wildlife Service and other partners on a massive reforestation effort, for example, in the lower Rio Grande Valley. And similarly, there's been an amazing constellation of partners doing the same work in the lower Mississippi. And that's where some of the most progress is being made on reforestation to advance carbon and other goals. I want to talk about now reforestation within those existing forest areas that have been damaged. And there are a lot of different examples of that I could describe, ways in which forests have been damaged. But I want to focus in particular on wildfire, because I think we're all aware that wildfire has become a major driver of forest loss and an escalating driver of forest loss thanks to climate change. And this has absolutely huge carbon implications. First, look, let's start on the emissions side. Just look there on the left and you can see the incredible spike in carbon emissions from wildfire. In fact, we have a number of Western states that have become a net source of carbon from their forests because of emissions from wildfire and also just emissions from widespread mortality of their forests. And so that's bad enough. But when we don't restore those forests, when we leave severely burned over areas like the Hayman File in Colorado, if we leave incredibly severely burned areas like that and we don't actively reforest them, we basically don't restart the engine of carbon sequestration to start pulling that carbon back into the land. And so it's just absolutely vital that we ramp up our reforestation of burned areas to match the escalation in areas that are burned so severely that they will not come back without active reforestation, without tree planting. It's again, you think about tree planting as basically restarting the carbon engine in the land in places where it's not going to come back from natural regeneration. And we have lots and lots of those areas now because of wildfire and because of other extreme disturbance events. So it's a really, really critical piece of the carbon equation through reforestation. And one of the things I want to underscore a particular interest for this group is the reality that we all talk about wanting to use wood as a climate change solution, and it is a climate change solution. Wood stores carbon. It requires less energy to manufacture than other building materials. It is absolutely the space-age building material, climate-smart building material of the future that we need. But in order to take advantage of it, there's a lot of concerns about whether that's going to lead to a level of forestry, even sustainable forestry, that's going to compromise other forest values. And so if you think about the potential to add tens of millions or even more than 100 million acres of forest to the American landscape, well, that creates a lot more to go around for both meeting our needs like mass timber and other uses of wood as a climate change solution, while still being able to address ecological values like some of the reforestation efforts that I've described. So this really gives us the chance to kind of have our forests and have our cake and eat it too when it comes to our forests. So just a couple of must-haves that I want to stress. One is nursery capacity. Our organization, American Forests and the Nature Conservancy, just actually this week published a study showing that we need to double nursery production in order to keep up with the increased demand for reforestation and achieving our climate change goals. And that's an area where we've really underinvested. We've funded the work, but we haven't funded this preparatory stage of actually growing enough seedlings to be able to go out and do reforestation on the landscape. So we're going to have to make sure that's part of what we invest in and advocate for going forward. And I also want to underscore how important it is that we're climate smart in all of our reforestation. These are pictures of the Camp Fire in California, one of the most severe and damaging fires in California's history. And so American Forest has been partnering on reforesting these lands with the Bureau of Land Management and the U.S. Forest Service and CAL FIRE. And we've been using this as really a learning lab for what does fully climate-informed reforestation look like, where we're using science-based tools to peer into the future, understand the future climate of this region, and come up with the right mix of species and genetics and planting techniques, things like the spacing and densities of how we're planting trees back to this landscape, to create a forest that's going to be fire resilient into a much hotter and drier future, instead of just trying to put it back the way it was. We talk about it as pre-storing forests for climate resilience, and we absolutely have to bring this approach to every reforestation project going forward if we're going to be successful. And so when we ask where can we do this work, well, I showed you with the Reforestation Hub, we outlined 133 million acres of opportunity. But I really want to laser in on one piece of that we think is compelling and immediate, and that's public lands. Federal lands, we have about 14 million acres of opportunity on federal lands, another 4 million plus of state, tribal, and local government lands that are in need of reforestation now. And that's enough to plant and regenerate over 5 billion trees, to give an almost 30 million ton per year bump to our forest carbon sink, and a chance in net over the life of those trees to remove almost 3 gigatons of carbon dioxide. So a great climate action opportunity on our public lands. And the beauty of it is we control that opportunity. It's simply a matter of making the decision to allocate the funding and ramp up the projects to get this work done. And we can use public land projects as the learning lab, as the proving ground for those climate smart approaches that I was describing, that we ultimately need all landowners to implement as we do this work all across the country. And great kicker is the economic opportunity that we can create. Good research that shows 39.7 jobs per $1 million invested in this work. So it's part of our COVID recovery as well. So let's start with public lands as a kickstart to getting this work done. And so just in closing to say, first of all, there's tremendous momentum right now on public policies that would help us do just that. The Climate Stewardship Act, which would put money into planting public lands of all kinds all over the country, actually including urban areas as well. And the Replant Act, which is a bit more narrowly tailored, but it would provide the U.S. Forest Service with enough funding to keep all of its 193 million acres of forest, the single largest forest ownership in the country, reforested into the future, even with it's enough funding that could even keep up with the kinds of increased demands that we're seeing from climate change. So really just a chance to permanently get it right on our national forests. And these are the kinds of opportunities that we need to take advantage of to give this work a kickstart. And then lastly, I'll just say that, there's a broader movement that's brewing out there as well. And it involves companies from all across the economy. It involves civil society organizations from Girl Scouts to church groups. And it includes governments at all levels, all partnering with nonprofits to get this work right. And I'm really proud that here in the United States, American Forests and the World Economic Forum over the last year partnered to help launch the US chapter of 1T.org as the first national chapter of this global Trillion Trees partnership platform, so that all the kinds of organizations in the US that want to do this work could come together, learn from each other, share resources, inspire each other, and ultimately move reforestation forward in this country. So we've actually already got over 1 billion trees pledged from the partners who are on board already, billions of dollars in additional supporting actions, and would be excited if others want to come join in this effort. It's a great hub of collaboration and resources for advancing reforestation. So I hope this has been a helpful quick primer on what's happening with reforestation. It's an incredible climate change opportunity. And if you'd like to learn more, please feel free to reach out to me and the folks at American Forest. We're always excited to find new partners in this work. Thanks.